Foundation for Spirituality in the Arts was started just 5 years ago to really foster greater connectivity between the arts, particularly visual arts, but really broadly speaking, and spirituality, which we view as a kind of spectrum between a more personal, introspective approach and going all the way to various faith traditions, which is a kind of communal way of expressing spirituality. So creativity and spirituality are often thought of as a continuum, really, which involves a sense of openness, receptivity, viewing the self as a bit of a vessel for communicating, receiving something from beyond the kind of ego boundaries and sharing that in some way. So I think the talk today will really shine a light on one aspect of that. So Amanda Sroka is our visiting curator. We bring artists as well as curators twice a year here to Charleston. So it's important to really foster artists' opportunities to engage with spirituality and with communities, but also really to help encourage new ways of talking about this connectivity, which is sometimes an area that is a bit difficult for people maybe trained in the art world that sometimes don't really have a ready language to talk about spirituality and its connectivity with contemporary art. It's very common, of course, to talk about this in relating to art from the past or the medieval period, but thinking about it as a contemporary component of artistic practice really takes some exploration and maybe going out of the comfort zone for some people. So I first met Amanda in 2014 when she was Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Since 2022, she served as the Senior Curator at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. Her creative work focuses on global histories of contemporary art with a specialized interest in interdisciplinary practices that operate at the intersections of our personal, political, and material worlds. She's currently organizing the forthcoming exhibition, Speaking in Tongues, which will open at the ICA next month and running through August. This exhibition will showcase an intergenerational and international group of contemporary artists who embrace the role of art as a conduit to the spiritual, exploring and expanding notions of the sacred and the divine. This exhibition will feature artists engaging with embodied and ecstatic forms of expression, ritual, and language. The show will really celebrate the spiritual as a vehicle for survival, kinship, and communion, centering on the work of Indigenous and diasporic artists from the global South to trace shared connections across geographies, cultures, and time. Here in Charleston, while she's in town, Amanda is approaching her residency as both a curator and a spiritual practitioner, using it as an opportunity to deepen and develop conversations that have been central to her recent research around the studies of esoteric expression, religious ritual, embodied translation, and the effects of empire on spiritual formation. She's particularly interested in exploring first-person experiences of spiritual possession and divine communion as they manifest across various religious, artistic, and cultural expressions within the city of Charleston and the diaspora, as they call it, home. This research represents an attempt to allow new definitions to emerge for what we understand as faith and what we name as spirit, as source, or God. So with this quite broad introduction, I'd like to give a wonderful greeting to Amanda.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to sit here. Thank you so much, Tyler. I was like, I feel like you've said everything. It's like we're just going to elaborate on a lot of those ideas. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight on your spring break for some of you. And I'm so grateful for this chance to get to share about this exhibition, which is something that I've been working on and developing over the last 2 years, but I often joke that it's like a show I've been working on my entire life. And together with my curatorial associate, Amelia Schaefer Del Valle, who's been really integral to realizing this project with me at ICALA. Thank you, just echoing the thanks to the Halsey, Michael, and also to Tyler and to Bindu and to Keller at the Foundation for Spirituality and the Arts for just welcoming me here, hosting me, and allowing me this chance to kind of, I feel like I'm on day 3, I get 4 of being here, and I will only just scratch the surface in my time, but it's been really rewarding. So this talk is kind of unique in that I'm sharing with you a sneak preview of an exhibition that has yet to open. So you're very much seeing behind the scenes. And as Tyler mentioned, this show, Speaking in Tongues, opens at ICALA on April 4th, so less than a month away now, and is up through August 23rd. So if you find yourselves in Los Angeles, come visit. This is where you can find us. Just, for those of you who don't know ICALA, a little bit of background and brief introduction about the museum, because I think it lays the groundwork for why this show can happen there. ICALA is a non-collecting contemporary art museum that was first established in 1988 as the Santa Monica Museum of Art. We then moved downtown, changed our name to the ICALA Institute of Contemporary Art in 2017. And our mission is to support art that sparks the pleasure of discovery and challenges the way we see and experience the world, ourselves, and each other. ICLA is committed to upending hierarchies of race, class, gender, and culture. Through exhibitions and community partnerships, ICLA fosters critique of the familiar and empathy with the different. And that kind of last part of our mission, I think, is something that this show is really tapping into, affirming, and maybe challenging. And it's, Speaking in Tongues is a chance for us to put that mission into practice as we think about what it means to empathize with folks who might think, believe, look differently than us, and to question that which feels really familiar. This show is, the exhibition has, this is a little bit more about what we look like, what we do. The show is accompanied by, Speaking in Tongues is accompanied by an exhibition catalog that includes writing about each of the artists in the show, which I'll talk about today, as well as commissioned texts by writer and poet Jackie Wang, religious and Black studies scholar Ashan Crawley, and artist, activist, and archivist Ginger Dunnell. I share that because what I am going to be sharing with you today is kind of excerpts from the essay that I wrote for the catalog, which I'm using some of my time here in Charleston and in residency just to kind of finish editing our book. So you'll get to see a part of that, which I think punctuating the essay and this presentation are kind of excerpts, poems, quotations, things that have grounded me and really formed how this research has taken shape. And then something to note too is that all of the artworks that you'll see here, the slides, are specific to the artists and artworks on view, but there's a couple of behind the scenes imagery that the artists were willing to share with us for the book, but that won't be in the catalog, so you'll see some of that too. But my text is called Overcome by Spirit. So forgive me because I normally don't read in these and I'll go in and out of it, but this has been the language that I've been given to share. Overcome by Spirit. In the Pentecostal church, to speak in tongues is said to describe the actions of someone who becomes so consumed by their encounter with the Holy Spirit that they respond in indecipherable languages and uncanny gestures. To speak in tongues is a holy abjection, a divine speech act, wherein body and voice expand beyond legibility or recognition. A spiritual experience is inherently one that overwhelms the senses and pushes them to their extremes. When one is overcome with the Spirit, aspects of this possession further manifest physically, sometimes through sweat, sometimes trembling and goosebumps, and at other times in tears. These outward indications of spiritual encounter aren't singular to the Pentecostal church and tradition, but are shared by a number of cultures and religious expressions. Across different belief systems, though, what remains constant is this relationship to the body of the individual and the body of the collective whole, as this site of intercession, the body as a site of transmission and translation. It's this place of contact between the holy and the human that we all share. Faith goes beyond any sort of epistemological sense of knowledge. It's a belief in that which we cannot see, but where we sense in the body and know in the soul. Both an attunement and an orientation, faith is a compass. A disciplined hope, even amidst the and not yet known. Honoring the differences that may exist between what people believe, for speaking in tongues, I wanted to focus on why we believe, turning to faith as this kind of shared human impulse and inclination, regardless of dogma or doctrine. And not just why, but also how belief is inspired, experienced, and articulated through artistic practice. So you'll notice throughout it's less about kind of this person believes this person believes this, but what are the shared impulses across them? Since the beginnings of human life, there has been an impulse to find purpose and meaning. In her book, How God Becomes Real, T.M. Lerman writes, at the heart of religious impulse lies the capacity to imagine a world beyond the one we have before us. As humans, we're hardwired for belief, and origin stories are a central component to religious teachings, offering narrative frameworks by which we can postulate our own answers to life's biggest questions. Order emerging from chaos, hope from despair, life from dust, the primordial mother, the divine creator. These are the kinds of mythologies that we use to be able to envision a world unfolding before our eyes, at times beautifully and at times horrifically. Belief offers us this potential to see possibility and to cultivate curiosity even amidst the ambiguity of life and often paralyzing forces of the present. Like the experience of standing at an ocean's edge, the feeling of the wind sweeping across your limbs at a mountaintop, or recognizing the patterns in the palms of your hands echoed in the stars, faith enables us to understand that humans are just a small part of a larger whole. Bringing together a constellation of 24 artists and artist collaborators, Speaking in Tongues amplifies artistic practices that unfix and expand held definitions of faith, the sacred, and the divine. Very varied in religious backgrounds, beliefs, and socio-political contexts in which they're working. The featured artists are joined by their distinct relationship to, as Tyler shared, ecstatic expression, ritual, as well as illegibility, as these tools by which to survive, build community, and story the world and our place within it. I think in this moment in particular, when religion is increasingly weaponized as an instrument to divide, this show is an attempt to celebrate the spiritual as this tool for connection and for reclamation. The exhibition intentionally centers queer, trans, and diasporic artists of color whose stories, communities, and spiritual practices have been systematically fractured by colonialism and threatened by patriarchal powers, which often necessitate a sort of syncretic or reimagined and often fragmented approach to language and to ritual. While honoring the personal and geopolitical specificities of each artist presented together, these works weave these delicate bonds across the wholes of history, culture, place, and ancestry. Localized and spatialized, the exhibition embraces a relationality that is made possible when differing aesthetics, expressions, ideologies, and politics are experienced beside one another, which often happens, as we're seeing here, like in the museum context. And I kind of take up this idea of beside as a horizontal relationship to, we're going to skip around a little bit because this really speaks to, these are some behind the scenes images from the artists. But beside as this kind of horizontal relationship that allows for complex and interstitial kind of spaces to exist across difference and disagreement where a dynamic set of relations, emotions, and negotiations can unfold. And in the process, kind of spirituality itself is revealed as this kind of constantly becoming conversation. Necessary to the approach, and perhaps implied also in its title, is to allow some elements to remain unknown, untranslated, and unwritten, thereby respecting the possibilities afforded by the same opacity and fugitivity that has enabled the survival of spiritual practices over time. So in this sense, the exhibition kind of takes on this a kind of spirit of refusal that resists a colonial logic to desire to fully know, to fully conquer, or fully understand. Within the exhibition, objects like a feathered coat, a chain-link mask here, strands of blonde hair slipping through golden fingertips by this work by Karen Lofgren. And for each of the artists in the show, touch is central, and when presence is not explicit, it's always implied. And this kind of idea, much like spiritual communion, is both touching and being touched when as a visitor you're seeing it, or a seeing and being seen. Favoring interpretation over translation, the works are joined under the umbrella of glossolalia to illuminate the ways in which art, like the body, serves as an instrument. I was just talking about this with somebody a couple of minutes ago. And each artwork and artist a conduit for transmission. And while many of the works point to the ceremonies, the rituals, the scriptures and altars that we might associate with a spiritual life, the artists are often thinking about sites of the sacred in stark contrast to spaces like the church, the temple, the synagogue, the mosque. And in that process, questions arise of how do we tell stories in ways that transgress dominant narratives? What does ceremony mean when you've been stripped of your culture and your language? What does revival look like in a world devoid of attention? In my experience, throughout my childhood, I grew up in a charismatic Christian church where church was always a supernatural place. It was a place where to speak in tongues and to dance in the aisles was really normal. It wasn't really until I moved to New York for college that I learned otherwise. But my upbringing there is what really shaped my initial ideas of art as something that has the capacity to transform the spirit and transcend our understanding, a form of ecstatic expression that is at once communicated and felt. And I share that because I'm also painfully aware that for many others, their association with the church is very different than my own, and that's certainly the case with the artists. And instead, the church can be an experience marked by violence, suppression, assimilation, and fear. And it's not often that I feel like I joke often that this show is like my most vulnerable because I'm also, as a curator, there's always decisions that are made. And yes, your name is sometimes below a curatorial credit line. But to be honest and upfront about why decisions are being made and what my subjectivity and impulse is feels especially important because I'm asking each of these artists to do the same. And, everybody has a relationship to religion, be it good, bad, traumatic, or joyful. And this project kind of, allows us to straddle these feelings of pleasure and pain, belonging, alienation, difficulty, and desire, to embark on a project that approaches conversations of religious and spirituality in the same way it requires of a curator and the artist. It also asks the audience to confront and grapple with their own connections to these ideas and all of its related baggage. I think something that's really important because a spiritual experience is inherently and often one that's experienced in the body. So many of the artworks that you'll see kind of have this relationship to a sensation that we encounter in the body. And I want visitors to think about what these works make them feel. What objects do you want to hold and to touch? And whose stories do you struggle to witness? It's an invitation in so many ways to stay in these places of discomfort, recognition, tenderness, and delight, and to suspend the beliefs and doubts of the mind, to reconnect with the knowledge that is held in your own body and bloodlines, a knowledge of the soul. Here, rather than the show really favors multiplicity rather than monolith, to allow these distinct, culturally specific and felt first-person responses to questions of purpose and manifestations of belief to kind of come together. Guiding the curatorial thesis of the show is the featured work of Carlos Villa. who was raised in the Bay Area. Villa lived and worked for the majority of his career in San Francisco. And his practice as an artist, as a teacher, as a curator, an activist betrayed any distinction between those roles or identities. And his work as an artist really emerged from the lack of representation in art history, textbooks and museum walls. And through that, he developed his own kind of history and art history that engaged his Filipino ancestry and the African, Asian, and Pacific strands that make up his diasporic heritage. As you can see in this work here, which will be in the show, he often incorporated materials like feathers, bones, blood, and shells in his works. And in a way, they kind of adopt the aesthetics of ceremonial objects that were often used in his performances. So I showed an image of Ritual from 1980 earlier. But within his paintings, drawings, and painted coats like this one, something that occurs as a reoccurring motif is this spiraling form. So you can kind of see that in the red and also on the outskirts of the cloak. It's similar to the kind of spiraling of the Ouroboros snake, an ancient symbol of a snake eating its own tail as this kind of symbol of rebirth and transformation. And it's similar to this, Villa's coils make these explicit references to transformation and ancestral connection. Likewise, within the show, you have this amazing kind of trance-inducing geometry of Hannah Her's threshold, which invokes the spiral once again as both an access point and a portal. And at once a movement towards these kind of, and it's hard to tell obviously from these images, but there's this kind of real vibration that happens in front of this work where it's like the spiral is both like receding and coming at you in a really powerful way. So it plays with our sense of perception, place, and again, orientation. In the notes and lecture drawings of the Chicana feminist writer and scholar Gloria Anzaldúa, a similar iconography appears of this spiral, a shape that she terms the remolino, which translates to swirl or vortex, or cenote, which you can see here, which means sinkhole or well, both of which symbolize the kind of deep psychic and spiritual spaces of the subconscious. Anzaldúa was raised in South Texas in the Rio Grande Valley, and she witnessed the ways in that upbringing that the border between the U.S. and Mexico was and continues to be used as this imposing boundary wielded by racist and imperial interests to divide and to other. However, for her, the borderlands were also a rich place of historical, cultural, and socio-political, as well as spiritual intersection. Her kind of understanding of spirituality was really informed by her exposure to things like curanderismo, Mexican mythology, Jewish mysticism, and tarot, and that ultimately allowed her to kind of develop this concept of Nepantla, which is a reference to this liminal space of the in-between, a space of rebirth, a space of transformation, a space wherein to be composite, to be multiple, to be fragmented is actually to be whole. So in her work, and we're actually showing these are really rarely presented because Anzaldúa is namely known as a writer, but she would do these amazing drawings on transparent paper when she was giving lectures at the time, particularly at the University of Texas in Austin. And so for the show, we're actually showing some of her work and kind of honoring her both as a writer and as an artist, which feels really important because, she would host these writing workshops that were called Speaking in Tongues workshops for Chicana writers, wherein this kind of relationship to writing was a way to talk about how marginalized bodies have been forced to crawl across borders, to speak in codes, and to hide rally cries and spiritual songs, but how that was a source of power. And that objection could actually be a condition of power. And so thinking about language like religion, which is often a tool of colonization and erasure, speaking in tongues is kind of adopting this approach to language and abjection to illuminate the mother tongues and practices that have evaded the hands of colonial capture. And so for some of the artists in the show, they take this approach to language quite literally. Here, I'm showing you an image that's kind of an inspiration for the artist Raven Chacon and the curator Candace Hopkins, who for the show are making a new commission score called Code Talker, which was inspired by the Navajo code talkers during World War II. So the U.S. military at that time was using these code talkers and the Diné language as a way to as a military use, but prior to its exploitation for military gain. The Diné language was significantly threatened by efforts of assimilation within Indigenous communities, and it perhaps comes not as a very big surprise that one of the earliest extensive written translations into Diné was that of the Christian Bible through missionaries. So the entanglement of that work and that relationship across religious traditions. So here I don't have an image of their work because I will get it on Friday. But this kind of military translation of the language was something that was really inspiring to them. And I think the work that they're making for the show really speaks to the mutability of language itself. Much like the Diné language within Korean shamanic tradition, very little is written down. It's an oral tradition, and instead the practice is inscribed, held, and transmitted through the body. The artist Jessie Chun draws from these practices and modes of communication in her own work to develop a series that she calls Scores for Unlanguaging, like what you see here. And inspired by the Korean tradition of paper cutting known as solgong, Chun's work reimagines new grammars that slash through dominant notions of language and legibility. So these are kind of two examples of artists who are really thinking about and using language itself. But central to the exhibition, beyond language and legibility, are also artists who are working at the thresholds between the sacred and the profane, the human and the divine, and the living and the dead. And that's certainly in the case of Tuan Andrew Wynne, whose work, Because No One Living Will Listen, will be on view. And that the work tells this beautiful story of Habiba, who as the narrative unfolds, she reads this letter that she wrote to her deceased father, in which she chronicles her attempted pilgrimage to their ancestral homeland of Morocco. And haunted by the impossibility of return, she's kind of describing being caught between worlds, being caught between Vietnam and North Africa, Buddhism and Islam, among the many worlds that she operates within. And so through this story, you kind of get a sense of her own becoming. And this is a really great example of like a really personal, individual story that's used to tell this broader narrative. And Carlos Villa's aforementioned performance of Ritual, you see this kind of spiraling figure or spiraling motif on the coat. It brought together the artist studies of African Dogon cosmology, Tai Chi, Filipino Kulintang drumming, jazz music, and action painting, which even further affirmed the artist's syncretic approach to spiritual tradition and cultural history. From this action, only traces remain, and only kind of some not so great photographs like what we have here. But the traces that remain are carriers of Villa's implied presence. So we have the feathered coat. There was this canvas that in one of the images you saw him kind of making these impressions of his naked body on throughout the performance. And this incredible like paper mache mold. So these like paper mache covered in feathers, which is like at his chest, which was a mold of his body that was kind of laid out like a corpse in the performance. And I didn't actually realize that when both of these works were presented in the show, but through talking with Villa's family, learned more about the performance itself, which is kind of resonant to this work by Ira C. Hu, an artist based in Los Angeles, who made this new work when she was in residence at the Kohler Foundation, where she has these kind of porcelain cast bones that make up the corpse of this figure who she calls Blue Child, a member of her imagined Blue People, a clan of Hugh's own dream world, who moved through their sacred lands with indigo skin and pidgin dialects. Suspended somewhere between waking and dreaming, life and death, altar and grave, this work will be presented on this kind of like mud and dirt kind of pedestal. The work speaks to the politics of representation while also cultivating through her really distinct use of materials, here porcelain being one of them, indigo being another that comes up within this work, and the presence of, thinking about the presence of cultural and earth-held memory. So this, an image that you've seen in some of the posters around here, a work by Aki Anda. The roots of the word religion defined it as both a rebinding, from the Latin relegare, the reconnection of the human to the divine, and to take careful note, from the Latin relegare, to ponder and to contemplate the divine through ritual actions. Every spiritual practice is an exercise in attention, resisting the noise of the world and harmonizing one's ears to the whispers of the spirit. Rituals, in turn, are small acts of attention that are inherited, learned, carried, and enacted in and on the body, often involving a series of repeated gestures and words to incite what Lerman, who I referenced earlier, calls a kind of spiritual kindling. Elaborating on this igniting capacity of ritual objects within the exhibition are the charm-like sculptural fetishes of Karen Lofgren, which you saw earlier, which were inspired by her experiences growing up in Amazonia and a Tibetan Dharma center in Canada, along with an installation of bells by Aki Anda, featuring hundreds of these handheld bells, some collected, some gifted, others found. Anda's artwork makes reference to the bell as a tool across spiritual and cultural traditions used to signal attention, to convoke, and to cleanse. And for the exhibition, Aki is doing a performance of the bells on our opening day, which I think will be really special. Another kind of ritual object we find in the exhibition is that of Luis Fernando Zapata, where there you can see these kind of a series of inscriptions. And he was really inspired by Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Mesoamerican funerary traditions. So his sculptures are at once these kind of votives of protection, often taking on a shield-like form that foster life in the face of death. This was propelled by his own HIV diagnosis in 1984. That's really when he started making work significantly, and was trying to reconcile with the unbridled state-sanctioned violence and neglect that marked this period in the 80s and continues today, when many of his friends, neighbors, and queer community members were dying of HIV and AIDS. And instead, in response to this, he really turned to ancient life forms as this life source, a medium through which to reflect upon the fragility of human existence and his own. In Senganaguti's work, Elliot Love, this triptych that we see here, we see a series of photographs featuring her late husband in the bathtub of their Colorado Springs home. These photographs were printed posthumously after Elliot's recent passing, and the three photographs in the exhibition will be haloed by a series of drawings that Senganaguti is making for the show in dirt and sand that kind of surround the triptych like an altar. So it becomes this almost ritual of her own, an altar of her own to Elliot. And another ritual altar appears in the show in the form of this sculpture by Viet Le, which is wrapped in this white cloth, which you can kind of see from this image of Viet Le's storage. So bear with me with some of the photographs that you're seeing too. But the work itself is wrapped in this white cloth covered in resin, which is similar to the white cloth commonly used in Vietnamese death rituals to symbolize mourning and the transition of the soul. The work itself was created in the wake of the deaths of 3 people who were incredibly close to Viet, and as a way to honor their lives and their enduring impact. These portals between the spirit and the human are further taken up as subjects within the work of artist, deathwalker, and soul tender Marwa Abdullah Rahman, whose sculptural paintings are made in communion with channeled guides from the spirit world that really direct her in her work. And in his installation titled The Kissing of the Threshold, Fazal Rizvi explores Shia Muslim funerary traditions of grief and memorial. The work at ICLA features a site-specific pool evocative of the ghusl, the washing of the body, as well as these wudu pools, which are common to Muslim mosques. Nearby in the exhibition, a mound of soil points to the burial site as a conduit between earth and spirit. And there's a 14-channel sound installation that's presented. Again, this is a work that's site-specific, so I have no images of what it will look like. But a sound installation that features Urdu lamentations of grief, signature to the sozkwani, which is a form of musical and poetic expression, a kind of elegiac form of that, that's playing throughout the galleries as visitors kind of sit nearby to this pool. So drawing from these rituals of remembrance, Rizvi, along with a number of these other artists, like Vietle, like Senganagudi, are exploring the ways in which mourning can serve to cleanse, renew, reconnect, and repair. So this is an example of Samara Fazal's work. And I'll leave you with some of these quotes to read while I read to you. So a lot of language coming at you. What happens at the edges of language when we stutter, stumble, and struggle with our words? When there's only breath, tears, sweat, and unutterable groans that emerge from the canyons and caverns of the body. In the Bible, the Hebrew word hagah is often translated as meditate, used to speak to the act of meditating on the words of God. Again, relager. Yet this term also carries meanings like mutter, growl, utter, suggesting a more active, embodied, and unlanguaged form of communion meditation. Within the Speaking in Tongues exhibition, one of the featured performances, so we have a live performance series over the course of the show where different commission performances will be realized, and one of them is a work called Bless with Switch, which is a collaboration between artist, playwright, and intuitive psychic, Asher Hartman, and vocal performance artist and operatic composer, Jasmine Arpia, who's featured here. During the performance, Orpia moves vocally and physically through the complexities, possibilities, and limits of language, shape-shifting, code-switching, as the title implies, through layers of man-made verbiage to get to the core, the cenote, the oceanic womb of our origination. At once a possession and a rupture, the performance itself is also this kind of release. Another performance I'm talking about here for the exhibition is that of Ron Athey and Carmina Escobar. Raised in a Pentecostal church, Ron Athey combines the pageantry and iconographies of the church with goth punk sensibilities, AIDS activism, and BDSM performance, resulting in a practice characterized by queer and expansive approaches to community. Athey was also the subject of a major solo exhibition that was realized by Amelia Jones for the ICALA not too long ago. In his ritualized operatic collaborations with extreme vocal performer Carmina Escobar, the two artists alternate the use of their voices, producing this kind of hypnotic call and response effect. For the exhibition, Athey and Escobar are reuniting for a newly commissioned ritual vocal performance that pushes the limits of the voice and our understanding of the void from which it emerges. Of all the artists in the show, Ron himself also very often and commonly in his performance work will speak in tongues. As a little background, from 1906 to 1909, the infamous Azusa Street revival in Los Angeles marked the beginnings of the global spread of the Pentecostal church. Another reason why this show feels especially resonant in LA. Led by the pastor William J. Seymour, the congregation, remarkably for this time, was racially integrated. What would become Azusa Street Mission began in the home of Richard and Ruth Asbury on Bonnie Bray Street with a handful of people and their children at a weekly prayer meeting. Yet on one particular night in 1906, the sick were healed, miracles were performed, and tongues were spoken, signaling the inbreaking of the Holy Spirit. As crowds gathered to both witness and experience this outpouring in the days that followed, the Asbury's front porch quite literally collapsed, forcing the believers to relocate to a building on Azusa Street, which was originally built for an African Methodist Episcopal church. Like the first day of Pentecost in the book of Acts, this Los Angeles revival began in the intimacy of the home. What would be referred to as crazy, outrageous, or fanatical. There's actually like a New York Times that exists with the Wikipedia page that you can, or Los Angeles Times article, that uses all of those terms to describe this experience outside the church. This experience was safely, even if momentarily, held within the comfort of Asbury's four walls. In the work of Lydia Uramane, whose photograph I also showed earlier, these scanned photographs are from her own family archive to illuminate the house as a site of worship and community. Her House of Hope archives chronicles Uramane's upbringing in a Christian commune in Algeria, which was founded by her parents in the 1980s, shortly before the start of the Algerian Civil War, which was a period of heightened Islamic nationalism and increasing persecution of Christians. Yet through her photographs, like those that you see here, we come to see the home as a church, and the church as a kitchen, a bedroom, a living room, a safe space, and a shelter. This relationship to protection and revelation are also primary subjects in the work of Tiana Nakia McLeod, whose work you see on the left, and Belkis Ayon on the right. McLeod is a priestess of Santeria Lukumi. Ayon was a messenger of the male-only Afro-Cuban religious society known as the Abakua. Both artists have engaged with the subjects of African diasporic culture, spirituality, and tradition. In Speaking in Tongues, McLeod's armor-like chain-link mask is situated in dialogue with collagraphs from Ayon's Vernicle series. As the title suggests, Ayon's works are related to the veil of Veronica, the Christian relic said to bear the image of Jesus. In Déjame Salir, we encounter the imprint of Ayon's own face, held or seemingly imprisoned in the work, within the circular bounds of her printed collagraph. The veil of Veronica is also known as the sundarium, which is Latin for sweat cloth. Cloth is central to the Black Southern Baptist communities in which Tiana McLeod was raised, and to the Baia Candomblé tradition, which developed in Brazil simultaneously with Santeria and Cuba, wherein initiates are wrapped in fabric to secure the presence of the Orisha. Referencing the cloth covering as a symbol of possession and protection, these works ask us, who is worthy of the image behind the veil? Within the exhibition, I'm curious about how we can hold both the I and the other, and the individual and the collective, both the singularities of our wounds, which Anvo, an incredible performance art, writes about in this text on possession, as well as the shared experience of existence. The first artworks that visitors see when entering the show is actually Raven Chacon's Compass, which is a musical score realized on ICLA's 7th Street facade, the picture of which you saw earlier. And it's going to be activated both at the exhibition's opening and closing. The score is meant to be performed by a single electric guitarist who takes his cues, I say he because Andrew Toll is performing it, from the surrounding environment. So the shadows, the wind, the birds, the clouds, or trucks barreling down 7th Street kind of direct how a musician reads this score. So every performance is unique in that sense. And this relationship to interconnection and entanglement is further emphasized in the collaborative work of Namira and Lexi Welch, who created this vinyl installation on the doorway entry, the threshold to enter ICILA, where you can only read the text when it's at a slight angle and the sun and the shadow are kind of, collaborating in perfect communion to read that. So experience before you even enter the galleries, these kinds of work bridge intellect, felt experience, and divine incomprehension, laying the foundation for the exhibition's guiding through line. That meaning is formed in communion with nature, with spirit, and with one another. I'm almost done. In Speaking in Tongues, voices moan, bodies bend, and pages unfurl like tongues, and shifting forms hidden within knots and folds give ways to images of the spirit. In the Sufi tradition, dervishes perform what is known as the Sama ceremony, in which they spin and whirl as a form of active, ecstatic dance. Their repeated 360-degree turns are said to symbolize the planets orbiting the sun. Their hands, one raised towards the sky, the other towards the earth, a symbol of the union between God and all living things. Like the twirls of the remolinos in Anzaldua's work, the wrapping of the initiate, and the enveloping of the deceased, the spiritual choreography of circling serves as both an act of disorientation and a grounding. It's not a coincidence that visitors in the ICLA exhibition will have to literally circle the platform of Anda's bells. Via's coat is kind of suspended, and you circle below it to see it, McLeod's mask, as well as Fazal Rizvi's pool. bringing together the personal and the ancestral with the spiritual, the ecological, and the political. The artworks featured within the exhibition attempt to reintegrate the notion of the human into a larger cosmic reality, pointing to the invisible yet perceptible and felt frequencies and manifestations of belief that bind us across dimensions and temporalities. Assuming a posture of welcome and embracing an expansive approach to kinship, Speaking in Tongues attempts to reveal the way in which a spiritual life can take us beyond the boundaries of our own knowledge and understanding. In the process, inspiring newfound connections with the wisdom held in our bodies, tongues, souls, elders, and earth. It is a site where community is acknowledged as a holy covenant and where every breath holds the capacity for resurrection. A place where grief, anger, empathy, and hope, and all of the contradictions that make up what it means to be human, can exist beside one another. It is a place where world expands into meaning, soil meets the sky, and the body graced by spirit is transformed. Here, the invisible world comes alive, and each artwork is a testimony. Whether you believe or not is up to you. Thank you. Yeah.
We have some time for questions, I guess about 10 minutes. We don't have a mic to pass around, but since it's a small room, I think if you just speak up, we should be able to hear you. Anyone would like to start? Please.
I'm from Jersey, so I don't do Thank you. I love you, and I love the work that you're doing, and I love this whole organization. This brought to mind death and life from the power of the tongue, Proverbs 18:21. The word, live or kill. In the beginning, I shared privately the heart opening I had when I went to see the Venerable Buddhist monks. And they spoke of mindfulness. And that resonates to me as a Greek Orthodox Christian because we talk about stillness and the prayer of the heart. So that's that opening, being open to other faith walks, like in the very beginning in your introduction, new definitions of form and new ways to believe. And if we don't keep our heart open, we miss out. And what I loved about the work is it felt like a meditation, the ancestral dirt, the stillness of the vortex, and I feel like the work is asking us to be still and just experience me. You don't need to make me be what you are or have your belief. And so my question is, what do you see as our greatest challenge to opening our heart and being still in a world that seems to celebrate chaos, control, and the misuse of power, both personally and creatively?
Oh, what do I see as that? I mean, I think that, power is driven by ego. And so I think it's our own, our greatest challenge is ourselves. I believe that we hold the power within us to overcome and to process what's happening in the world. But I think, I would say the greatest challenge is ourselves. To being, we make the choice to be open. We make the choice to listen with open ears, and that I have found in the process of this show, but also in my life of being willing to listen and be, disagree with someone productively. We as a society don't know how to do that. But we get to make that choice, of the posture that we assume and navigate the world. So that would be my answer, but that's a big question. Yeah.
Well, I guess I was going to say, speaking of just the way people are receiving this kind of work, I mean, how have you found just some of your colleagues from other institutions or artists that you've been talking to just about doing this kind of show? What sort of feedback or reactions have you gotten from people?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like I shared at the beginning of why the kind of institution that ICALA is, which is why I feel, like it's an institution that both its staff and audiences will really like hold and carry the show and are willing and receptive to that. I think that there's something happening within the contemporary art world, I find, where there is more of an openness now. I had pitched a version of this show like 8 years ago, and that was really, it wasn't received in the same way, and it wasn't even for myself. I mean, I think I found as I started to talk with more folks about the show, I remember an artist coming up to me and she was like, "So you like really believe in God?" And I was like, I mean, I do, yes. And she's like, "I've never met a contemporary curator that does that or that talks about that." And, so I was like, oh my gosh, in a good way. I was like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's talk about why it's, maybe taboo within contemporary art to talk about these things. So yeah, I'm really curious how it will be received. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm within the LA art community for this and a desire to have these conversations. And I think the museum is really equipped to be like a host to maybe the kind of discussions, disagreements, and possibilities that will emerge from it.
Yes, I was to ask, because you just said you had a version of the show that you pitched about 8 years ago.
Yes.
And then between that and then the show that's going at ICA, how did a lot of it shift? I mean,
yes. Yeah, well, I say that because yeah, when I was, and it also wasn't the right time for it. I was there's many reasons why it didn't happen, but myself and when I was at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the recently hired curator in the Prints, Drawings, and Photographs department, Laurel Garber, and I were talking about doing an exhibition of Belkis Ayoun and Tiana McClodon's work. Tiana's based in Philly, has been writing about Belkis Ayoun's work for, been curious about it for a long time, and the museum has some of Ayoun's collagraphs in the collection. And so that was I would say maybe a seed to when I started to kind of realize, there were a lot of important questions that came back to us in the kind of curatorial idea for the show around kind of are we equipped as a museum to handle the kind of conversations that would come with it? And yeah, so I think it was that's the seeds, and the fact that we now get to, through this show, to have their work in dialogue is really special. But that's the kind of reference. I mean, the show itself, I had somebody ask me the other day, well, how did you decide on these 24 artists? When do you, and I think that's as a curator, the hardest part, especially with a more thematic group show, is deciding when to close it so you can share it. But I could work on this show for the rest of my life and be so nourished and excited by it. So it was really hard to be okay, this is it. And up until earlier this week, have artists who are I would just want to add one more thing or do that, and I'm can't do it. But yeah, so that maybe speaks to that a little bit. Yeah.
When you're trying to balance, there's such a broad range of media and also spiritual traditions and a constellation of work, and then also speaking to kind of an unintelligible practice. Are you thinking about wall text or how you engage a viewer to enter a space where you're both situating them within the work, but also allowing for this, kind of to experience the work without, explaining it?
Yeah. I feel the approach that we took was, and I think like thinking about really honoring the specificity of each artist and how they approach these conversations, which obviously is held within the work, but we have chosen, even for artists that have like multiple works, every artist will have like a more significant, let's say like section text that really offers for the viewer just some of these, like a lot of the points that I'm sharing today that allow you to maybe like understand, you know, what certain like recurring motifs or iconographies might mean, to draw your awareness. Like I said, in the physical installation, you're also doing some of this kind of like circling that's being talked about. So hopefully that's also a way, you know, to get back in your body. Like I think that's something, and is really important to me, that like what visitors leave with, it doesn't have to be like they've then like are now want to explore all of these religions or, but I think it is really about an embodied experience. I want you to leave with a different experience of your own body and the knowledge that you hold there, the memories that we hold there that sometimes are like unspoken. So yeah, but we are definitely, actually ICLA, we don't always have like a ton of wall text, but in this case, so that we can really like ground visitors in the world that these artists are building and putting them together. So that's how we're approaching it. Any other questions?
Well, I think to keep us on schedule, we'll just have one, I'll ask one more question.
Sure.
I was really curious how this process of research has kind of influenced your kind of curatorial practice and thinking sort of going forward, and how do you see this perhaps leading on to new avenues of research or curatorial practices through having gone through this process of really interrogating the spiritual side of so many of these artists?
Yeah. I feel like, it's been there in a lot of the work that I've done already. The show that was like just up at ICA that we just closed on the 1st with Sandra Vasquez de Laura was like an amazing solo exhibition. And so much of that was kind of looking at her own, the like cosmology that she built herself. So I think it's like there is this kind of pulsating relationship to spirituality that's there in my own curatorial work, but I think this is like being really explicit about it and naming it in a certain way. As I shared kind of with you and Bindu of like, in my 1 week here, but, and kind of being able to, like the reason why I had to read that text is because like I'm not at a distance enough from the show. Like it's not there yet for me to be like, just talk about it. That would actually be like 3 hours of all of your time. So it was a way to like kind of ground me. But I'm really interested in kind of diving deeper into conversations around possession and kind of thinking about, there's a number of artists who our conversations, a number of artists who aren't in the show, but our conversations led us down to that pathway. And I feel like, oh my God. And if you listen to this recording, I'm not going to propose a show right away on possession after Speaking in Tongues, but that is actually an avenue of research I'm really interested in, because I think, so much of creative practice is also like kind of this being overcome, but I'm really interested in it from a spiritual and religious kind of experiences of possession and how those manifest in artworks. My own background is namely in performance art, so that's why that kind of bent and approach and on the performative is often there. So that's what I'm curious about.
All right. Well, thank you so much just for sharing with us some insights.
Thank you all so much. Thanks for listening. And come to LA. Come see the show.